Hello everyone, welcome back to Study Room. In this video, we will be studying about the sexual mode of reproduction in organisms. We'll be studying about the sexual mode of reproduction in plants and in animals. So let us see that why the sexual mode of reproduction is so important. The DNA copying mechanism can be absolutely accurate, and the resultant errors are a source of variations in populations of organisms. So when the DNA copying mechanism occurs while reproduction, then what happens? There are certain errors, okay, and due to these errors, there are variations that are produced in the new individuals. Now, each new variation is made in a DNA copy that already has variations accumulated from previous generations. Okay, so this new variation that are occurring, okay, in every single individual, and these are a result of accumulated previous variations from generation by generation, right? Now, why are these variations so important, and why is the sexual mode of reproduction connected with these variations? Now we'll see that every individual organism cannot be protected by variations, okay? But in a population, when we see a population as a whole, variations are useful for ensuring the survival of the species, right? So in order to survive a species generation by generation and to exist on this planet, we definitely need a very important phenomena that is called variations, which are a resultant of the sexual mode of reproduction. As you studied before, the asexual mode of reproduction is generally producing the similar kind of organisms, right? The identical copies of the parent organism. But in sexual mode of reproduction, you will see that the new organism that is produced, they have certain other characteristics which are not present in the previous generation, or which are not present in the parent organisms. And this new generation is the new individual is entirely different. Like, it has certain variations in itself, which actually helps for the survival of the species on the planet. For example, if I give an example of how a species survive due to variations, you might have seen mosquitoes, right? So the mosquitoes, you see that there are certain mosquito repellents that are getting produced every now and then. Why is it so? This is so because the mosquitoes are getting resistant to the previous mosquito repellents, and that is why we need to produce new mosquito repellents which will kill the new variants of that mosquito. Because when there was this, if you see, if there are so many mosquitoes, okay, if there are so many mosquitoes in your house, and you spray a mosquito repellent, okay, you spray a mosquito repellent here, so what will happen that these many organisms will die. But this organism, this mosquito, is resistant to this mosquito repellent. Why? Because it has variation. It has a variation which is resistant. It has a gene, it has a DNA in itself. It has a variation in the DNA which is resistant to this mosquito repellent. And this mosquito will further produce so many mosquitoes, and thus the species will survive as a whole. Okay, so this is not a phenomena. The variation phenomena is not a phenomena that is advantageous to certain individuals, but it is advantageous to the existence of the species as a whole, right? Now we'll understand that how this sexual mode of reproduction actually occurs. Now, two different individuals in a population would have quite different patterns of accumulated variations. So these variations keep on getting accumulated from generation by generation. Okay. Now, combining these variations from two different individuals would create a new combination of variants. So the new individual will have a very new combination of variants which will be inherited from the two different parent organisms, right? Now, sexual mode of reproduction incorporates such a process of combining DNA from two different individuals during reproduction. So there is this combining of DNA, combination of DNA that happens in the sexual mode of reproduction, which is not present in the asexual mode of reproduction. And due to this combination, due to this process of combination of DNA, we have the phenomena that is called as variation. So variations actually occur in sexual mode of reproduction. Why? Because we have this process of combination of DNA that occurs in the sexual mode of reproduction. Now we'll see the process of cell division in sexual mode of reproduction. Special lineages of cells in specialized organs is present in which only half the number of chromosomes and half the amount of DNA as compared to the non-reproductive body cells. Okay. Now this process of cell division is called meiosis, where the germ cells from two individuals combine during sexual reproduction to form a new individual. It results in re-establishment of the number of chromosomes and the DNA content in the new generation. Now, if you see a cell which has half the number of content, okay, half the number of, these are the parent, okay, parent 1 and parent 2. Okay, so this has half number of chromosomes and half amount of DNA. Okay, and when these two combine, they form a new individual which has full amount. Okay, this has full amount of DNA and full amount of chromosome. So this individual will have characteristics or will have variations that have been accumulated in both the parents, and they'll be inherited from both of them to this individual, and hence the individual will be entirely new, and it will have new variants as such in its DNA, right? Let's understand this process of meiosis through this diagram. So you can see here there is the first phase called as the interphase, where we have 4 chromosomes, and gradually in the process of meiosis 1 we'll see that each chromosome replicates, and they have this there's this formation of 2 chromatids. Okay, from one chromosome we get 2 chromatids, and then these like the 4 the chromosomes that are present here, that they divide into half, right? They divide into half here, and they form these 2 chromatids are present. They form these 2 chromosomes here, and these 2 chromosomes are here. Okay, then these 2 chromosomes again divide into the chromatids divide, and they have this half the content of the DNA. Okay, so this is how in meiosis we have the formation of half the content of DNA in the daughter cells. Like in the parent cell we have the full content, DNA content, but in the daughter cell we have half the DNA content. So that is how, you know, from one parent there is production of 4 daughter cells. Okay, there is production of 4 daughter cells, and the daughter cells will have half the DNA content, and the parent had full DNA content, right? So this is how it is happening. And when these like daughter cells, one daughter cell from one parent, okay, one daughter cell from one parent and one daughter cell from another parent will come together, they'll form a new organism which will have the full DNA content, and hence this process is very, very instrumental in the sexual mode of reproduction, right? Next up, we'll be studying the specialized germ cells, the cells that are responsible for producing the gametes, or that are produced for the mode of sexual reproduction. The motile germ cell is called the male gamete. Okay, so the germ cell that are motile, that can move, they are known as male gametes, and the germ cells containing the stored food is called the female gamete. So female gamete has what the female gamete has? It has stored food in itself, and the male gamete, it is motile, it can move from one place to another. As the body designs become more complex, the germ cells also specialize. One germ cell is large and contains the food stores, while the other is smaller and likely to be motile. If the zygote is to grow, and which has highly specialized tissues and organs, so it develops into an organism. Okay, the zygote that is formed from these from the fusion of this male and female gamete, that zygote will grow into a new organism which has highly specialized tissues and organs, right? Now we'll be studying about the sexual mode of reproduction in flowering plants. So let us see that how these sexual mode of reproduction takes place in flowering plants. We'll first understand the structure of a flower. So you can see here, these are the parts of a flower where we have this. These are the petals that you see in the flower. Then these are the stamens that you see. Okay, this is the anther and the filament. The stamen consists of the anther and the filament. Okay, these are the male part of the plant. Okay, and this whole portion, the carpel that you see, this is the female reproductive part of the plant. Okay, this is the female reproductive part of the plant. These are the sepals that are the supporting organs. They protect the whole flower, and then these are the stalk or the branch that connects the flower to the tree or the plant. Okay, so you can see here that this is the male reproductive part and this is the female reproductive part. You will be asked to draw this whole diagram and explain the functions of the different parts of the flower. So now let us go through these parts of the flower one by one and let us see what are the importance of these parts. The reproductive parts of angiosperms are located in the flower, as we saw, that is stamens. The stamens and the pistils are the reproductive parts of the flower. The stamen is the male reproductive part, which produces yellow pollen grains, and pistil is the female reproductive part present in the center of the flower. Talking about other parts, the ovary, it contains ovules and each ovule has an egg cell. Okay, so this is also a very important part. And then the zygote. Zygote is formed when there is a fusion of the germ cells or fertilization, and thus this zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. So the zygote has the capability of growing into a new plant. Now let's discuss what are the different kinds of flowering plant. The first kind of flowering plant is unisexual flowers. The plants which have unisexual flowers. When flower contains either stamens or pistil, these are known as unisexual flowers. And the example of such flowers or such plants are papaya and watermelon. So these kind of plants, they have only either one of the reproductive parts of the flower, like either the female reproductive part, that is the pistil, or the male reproductive part, that is the stamen. So they do not have both of them. They have only either one of them, right? And the other kind of flowering plants are the plants which have bisexual flowers. Okay, these plants are known as bisexual plants. So these plants, the flowers of these plants contain both stamens and pistils. So they contain both the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part as well, right? And what are the examples of such flowers? The example of such flowers are hibiscus and musk. In this video, you can see the male germ cell produced by the pollen grain. It is pollinated by a vector or an insect or any means. By any means, it is pollinated and it is introduced into the flower. And then the male germ cell produced by the pollen grain fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule. This fusion gives us the zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. So as you can see that when the male germ cell or the male gamete fuses with the female gamete, it produces a zygote. Okay, and this zygote then grows and grows, and then a fruit is produced, and this fruit has the seeds. So these seeds actually, when planted into the soil, they form new plants. So this is how the process of sexual reproduction in plants, in flowering plants, actually occur, right? So let us see the germination of pollen on stigma. You can see here that when the pollen grains are kept on the are present here, when they reach the stigma, this is the stigma portion of the flower. So when the pollen grains reach here, okay, these pollen grains have the male gametes. Okay, so when the pollen grains reach here on the stigma, they are further transported into the this portion where in the ovary, where the egg cells are present, right? And you can see here this pollen grain, this is a tube nucleus is present here, and here the male gamete is transported into the egg cell or the ovary, egg cell that is present in the ovary, and here the male gamete comes and fertilizes with the egg cell, and then the zygote is produced. So here you can see the different parts of the process, the whole process, and the parts that are contributing in the process of fertilization or germination of pollen on stigma, right? Now we'll discuss this whole process that the pistil has three parts. The swollen bottom part is the ovary, middle elongated part is the style, and the terminal part is stigma or the sticky part, right? The ovary contains ovule and each ovule has a egg cell. So why is the stigma sticky? Because it helps in the sticking of the pollen grains to the stigma, okay? So that is why stigma is the sticky part. And the ovary contains ovule and each ovule has an egg cell, right? The male germ cell produced by pollen grain fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule. This fusion gives us the zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. The pollen needs to be transferred from the stamen to the stigma. Okay, stamen is the male reproductive part and stigma is the upper portion of the female reproductive part or the upper portion of the pistil, right? So the stamen needs to be transferred, like the pollen grain needs to be transferred from the stamen to the stigma, right? After the pollen lands on the suitable stigma, it reaches the female germ cells which are in the ovary. The tube grows out of the pollen grains and travels through the style to reach the ovary. Now germination. How does germination takes place? After fertilization, when the male and female gamete fuse together, the zygote is produced and the zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. The ovule develops a tough coat and is gradually converted into a seed. The ovary grows rapidly and ripens to form a fruit, right? You can see here this is a fruit and this is a seed that is produced, and seed is capable of giving rise to a new plant, and this is a fruit, okay? And a fruit is basically the outside layer of this seed is basically there to protect the seed from the outside environment. Now here we can see that how the germination, how the seed can give rise to a new plant. The seeds contain the future plant or embryo which develops into a seedling under appropriate conditions. So this process is known as germination. Let us see what is pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from the male part of the plant to the female part of the plant, right? You will be asked about how to define pollination, but then you will write that transfer of pollen from the male part of the plant to the female part of the plant leading to fertilization and the production of seeds is known as pollination. The pollen needs to be transferred from stamen to the stigma. Stamen is the male part of the plant and stigma is the upper portion of the female part of the plant, that is the pistil, right? You can see here how a vector or a pollinator, you can see it can be an animal, it can be an insect, anything as such, which transfers the pollen from the stamen to the stigma, right? Let us see the different types of pollination. The first type of pollination is self-pollination. If the transfer of pollen occurs in the same flower, like it happens in those flowers where the male part of the plant and the female part of the plant are present together. So here you can see from the stamen to the stigma, right? The transfer of pollen that takes place, and this kind of pollination is known as self-pollination, okay? And it happens in the same flower. The example of such flowers are wheat, tomato and peaches. So you have to remember what is self-pollination and what is the example of such kind of flowers. Now the next is cross-pollination. So if the transfer occurs in a different flower, it is achieved by agents like insects, birds, air or water. So the example are apples, blackberries or plums. So in this kind of pollination, what happens is the transfer takes place between different flowers, and how the transfer like from the stamen of one flower to the stigma of another flower, or from the stamen of this flower to the stigma of this flower. So this is how a cross is formed. As you can see here, a cross kind of a pattern is formed, and that is why it is known as cross pollination, right? So this is all about the sexual mode of reproduction in plants. We'll be studying about